Ready for another deep dive? This time, we're setting our sights on something we all know but maybe don't fully appreciate. The moon.
Definitely not just a pretty face in the night sky.
Right. We're diving into Rebecca Boyle's New Our Moon. And trust me, she reveals some surprising ways the moon has shaped our world and even ourselves. And get this, it all kicks off with a World War II battle.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, the Allied invasion of Tarawa. Boyle uses it to show just how powerful the moon's influence can be.
So we're talking about tides here, right?
Exactly. The Allies were depending on a high tide, absolutely crucial for their landing craft. But what they got was, well, practically a low tide. Turns out the moon was at its apogee.
Meaning its farthest point from Earth.
Right. And Boyle explains that this distance actually weakened the moon's gravitational pull just enough to cause that disastrously weak tide. Imagine planning a battle around tides only to be outsmarted by the moon itself.
It really highlights how even what seems like a small change in lunar gravity can have huge consequences. And it's easy to forget that the moon's orbit is actually elliptical.
So its distance from us is always shifting.
Exactly.
Okay, so apogee for farthest, perigee for closest. Got it. But hold on, Boyle takes this whole idea of the moon's influence way beyond battlefields. She argues that it actually played a key role in shaping life itself.
Now that's a bold claim.
Yeah, she goes all the way back to the Devonian period, when fish developed those first crucial lungs that eventually let them, well, their descendants, walk on land.
And her argument is that the moon's gravity influenced this. How so?
Through those extreme tides the moon was creating back then, imagine those early fish maybe getting stranded in tidal pools as the water receded way further than they were used to.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
Those that could survive out of water, even for a little while, would have a huge advantage.
Survival of the fittest gill breathers, I guess you could say.
Exactly, and it's a great example of how even something as seemingly simple as a tide tool can be an incredible evolutionary pressure cooker. And Boyle doesn't stop there. She brings up a more recent example too with those little speckled sea lice.
What, those tiny crustaceans?
Very same. They actually have genes that are synced to lunar phases.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they change color with the tides and even time their reproduction with the moon's cycles. It's incredible.
A biological clock set to the moon. It makes you wonder how many other creatures are out there with these hidden connections to the moon.
It's a question that scientists are only just beginning to explore. And it makes you realize the moon's influence on evolution isn't just something that happened millions of years ago. It's still happening today.
It's like the moon has been this silent director behind the scenes of life on Earth all along. But hold on, because Boyle doesn't stop there. She then takes us on a journey through time, exploring how humans have perceived the moon across history.
And how we've tried to make sense of it, right?
Exactly. And it gets really interesting when she takes us to a place called Warren Field in Scotland. Archaeologists discovered these mysterious pits there, and get this, they're aligned with lunar phases.
Okay, so potentially some kind of early attempt to track time, long before calendars as we know them.
That's what some researchers think. And to add to the mystery, Boyle also talks about the Nebra sky disk.
That's that Bronze Age artifact, right?
The one and only. It depicts the moon and stars with incredible accuracy, which is mind-blowing considering it's thousands of years old.
It really makes you wonder how advanced their knowledge of astronomy really was.
Right. And while these ancient cultures were trying to decipher the moon's movements, others were busy worshiping it as a god.
It was central to their whole worldview.
Totally. And Boyle gives us this fascinating example of a Babylonian king, Nabonidus. He was completely devoted to the moon god Sin, like seriously devoted, even when it ended up costing him his kingdom.
Talk about dedication. But as we'll see, this view of the moon as a deity, it didn't last forever, did it?
Not at all. As we'll discover, that reverence for the moon as a god started to shift with the rise of those Greek philosophers. They were all about observation and reason, and they came up with a radically different view of the moon.
It's amazing how they challenge centuries of beliefs just by, looking up and asking questions. And that quest to understand the moon, it eventually led to some really wild theories about where it came from in the first place.
Like, are we talking about the giant impact hypothesis here? That whole thing with a Mars-sized object smashing into Earth? It sounds like something out of a movie.
Right. It's mind-boggling to think about. This hypothetical object, which scientists have dubbed Theia, supposedly collided with Earth millions of years ago, blasting this massive cloud of debris out into space.
Okay, yeah, I can sort of picture that. A cosmic crash that big, it could totally create a moon. But here's where I get tripped up. Boyle mentions that moon rocks and Earth rocks are chemically very similar. So if the moon was formed from Thea's leftovers, shouldn't they be different?
That's a major puzzle that's got scientists scratching their heads. You see, when you look at the ratios of key elements like oxygen, titanium, chromium, they all point to Earth and the moon sharing a common origin.
So where does that leave the whole giant impact idea then? If it wasn't Thea, what other explanations are out there?
Well, some scientists propose that early Earth might have had multiple moons, maybe formed from a series of smaller impacts. And over time, these moonlets could have merged, combining their material and eventually forming the moon we know and love today.
Multiple moons colliding. Now that's an image I can get behind.
It's pretty epic, right? But then Boyle throws in an even wilder theory, the synestia hypothesis.
Ooh, I love where this is going. Hit me with it.
Picture this. The impact with Thea is so cataclysmic that both Earth and Thea are completely vaporized. They basically turn into this swirling, superheated cloud of molten rock and vapor spinning at an insane speed. Boyle calls it a synestia.
So Earth and Thea become this cosmic smoothie?
Pretty much. And then, as this synestia gradually cools and spins, it eventually separates. The denser material collapses in on itself to form the Earth, and the remaining material, well, that coalesces to form the moon. It's a wild theory, but it could potentially explain why Earth and the moon are so chemically alike.
Okay, my brain's doing backflips, but I think I'm starting to wrap my head around it. But you know, what strikes me is how much we can learn about our own planet just by studying the moon. Boyle even calls it a biographer for Earth.
It's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Because the moon doesn't have an atmosphere to speak of, and its surface is constantly exposed to space. It's covered in craters, right?
Right.
And each one of those craters is like a record of an asteroid impact. It's like looking at a history book of our solar system's past, all preserved on the moon's surface.
So by studying those lunar craters, we can get a glimpse of what Earth might have experienced billions of years ago.
You got it. And it goes even further. The moon's craters can even give us clues about the sun's history, particularly how it rotated earlier in its life. Boyle explains that if the sun spun much faster back then, it would have unleashed these intense solar flares.
Which could have messed with the chances of life developing on Earth. Wow, it's mind-blowing to think about. The moon holds secrets not just about our planet, but about the very star that makes life possible. Speaking of life, we've already talked about how the moon's gravity affects things like the tides and even animal behavior, but are there any other connections?
Well, consider this. The moon's presence has directly stabilized Earth's rotation, giving us the consistent day and night cycles that we totally take for granted.
Right.
And that stability has been absolutely crucial for the development of life as we know it. Without the moon's influence, Earth's axis could tilt all over the place, leading to some seriously wild and unpredictable climate swings. Life as we know it wouldn't stand a chance.
I had never thought of it like that. The moon is like our planet's ultimate wingman, keeping things stable, influencing the tides, maybe even playing a role in those first breaths way back when.
And what's even more fascinating is that this kind of setup, a planet with a relatively large and stabilizing moon, it might be incredibly rare in the cosmos. Boyle points out that none of the other rocky planets in our solar system have a moon quite like ours.
So Earth's one of a kind, and not just because we have pineapple on pizza.
Exactly. It really makes you wonder if this unique Earth-Moon partnership is one of the key reasons why Earth is so bursting with life. But let's shift gears a bit. Beyond all the science, Boyle also delves into how the moon has captured our imaginations for, forever.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the moon is a staple in mythology, in art, in literature.
It's this endless source of inspiration. And Boyle does a brilliant job of connecting the dots, showing how those early attempts to understand the moon through stories and myths eventually gave rise to the scientific breakthroughs that allowed us to really understand its true nature.
It's like this reminder that science and storytelling, they're not so different after all. It really is amazing how the moon has inspired so many different cultures throughout history.
It's like this timeless muse in the sky.
And as we learn more about the moon and kind of unlock its secrets, we're also starting to face some big questions about our future with it.
Yeah, it feels like we're at this pivotal moment with all these new missions being planned.
Right, like with countries and even private companies talking about resource extraction, maybe even building permanent structures on the moon?
It's both exciting and a little bit daunting at the same time.
For sure. Boyle does a great job, though, of laying out both the possibilities and the potential problems.
It's a delicate balance, that's for sure.
Like, how do we reconcile this desire to explore with the need to be responsible?
Exactly. We can't just repeat the same mistakes we've made here on Earth.
It's like we need a whole new playbook for the moon.
One that prioritizes sustainability and ethical exploration.
Boyle brings up the Outer Space Treaty, the one that was signed back in the 60s.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
It's pretty interesting, actually. It says that no single nation can claim ownership of the moon.
Which makes sense.
But here's the catch. It also allows for something called the extraction and use of space resources.
Oh, wow. So how do you even begin to regulate something like that?
Right. It almost sounds like it's setting the stage for a cosmic gold rush.
It really does. It'll be crucial to establish some really clear guidelines, and fast, especially as more and more players are vying for a piece of the lunar pie.
It's almost like we're writing a new chapter in human history, and this time we have a chance to maybe, hopefully, get it right.
Absolutely. And it's not just about, the practical stuff like managing resources. Boyle also brings up some really important ethical questions.
Which are?
Well, for some cultures, the moon has deep spiritual and cultural significance. We need to be mindful of that as we expand our presence there.
It's like we need to be sensitive to the fact that not everyone views the moon through the same lens.
Exactly. It reminds me of when the Navajo Nation protested the scattering of Eugene Shoemaker's ashes on the moon.
Right, they felt it was a sacred place that shouldn't be disturbed.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that our actions have consequences that go way beyond just the scientific or the economic.
It makes you think about that overview effect that astronauts talk about.
You mean that shift in perspective they experience when they see Earth from space?
Yeah, like that feeling of awe and interconnectedness. It seems like that same perspective should be guiding our approach to the moon.
Totally. Imagine looking back at our planet from the moon, seeing its fragility, how precious and interconnected everything is.
It really makes you want to be more mindful of our place in the grand scheme of things.
And that brings us back to Boyle's book, which isn't just about giving us the facts about the moon, it's about making us think differently.
It really is. And the way she ends it with that beautiful scene of herself at Chimney Rock, watching the moon rise between those ancient spires.
That's such a powerful image, right?
It really stuck with me, this idea that our fascination with the moon goes back thousands of years, and it's still just as strong as ever.
It's a timeless connection.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize that as we venture back to the moon, we're not just exploring another world, we're writing the next chapter in our relationship with it.
It's a powerful thought to end on, and Boyle's book is a must-read for anyone who's ever looked up at the moon and felt a sense of wonder. It's science, history, culture, all woven together.
It's about the moon, but it's also about us. It's about understanding our place in the universe.
Well said. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me. This was amazing.
The pleasure was all mine. Until next time.